get us started with the technology stuff. So my plan is just kind of to keep time and go through and ask the questions. And then I know you all had kind of decided just to go in the order and answer in which Alicia announces you. Am I on board?
Yes,
Okay.
you are, Kelly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Also, hi, Sarah. Hi, EJ. Hi, Ronnie. Thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Hi, Kelly.
Pleasure.
All right, thanks everyone so much for joining. We still have a couple of people trickling in, so I'm just gonna get started on the tech piece while we have a few more people joining. My name is Alicia Lord. I'm with the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life, and I'm helping to facilitate the technical part of today's presentation / panel discussion. We're going to have some facilitated discussions, and then we're also going to open it up to the group. So at that time, we're going to have everyone unmute their mics so you can ask questions directly to our panelists. You can also use the chat box if you don't want to unmute yourself and speak. That's perfectly fine too. Feel free to ask any questions you'd like or put any comments in the chat box. Today we're going to have Dr. Veronica LaFaso from Weill Cornell, Dr. Elizabeth Santos from Geriatric, she's a geriatric psychiatrist, and Sarah Duval Esquire from the Center for Elder Law and Justice, Civil Legal. Kelly will be moderating today, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So I wanted to get us started off with a brief introduction from our three panelists. I'll let you all kind of describe yourself and your work on the E-MDTs. Why don't we go ahead and start with Dr. LaFaso.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ronnie LaFaso. I'm an associate professor of clinical medicine in the Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine at Weill Cornell. And I am proud to say I was one of the first physicians on our first E-MDT in New York City in Brooklyn. Since then have become a team member not only in Brooklyn, but in Manhattan, and am now the medical director of all of the boroughs throughout New York City. I guess we'll talk more about what my roles are there, but it's been really one of the great pleasures to see the teams roll out throughout New York City. And I think the work that's being done is amazing. And I'm looking forward to hearing about everybody's experiences as well.
Great, thank you so much. EJ, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Dr. EJ Santos. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry, medicine, and neurology at the University of Rochester. I'm clinical chief for the Division of Geriatric Mental Health and Memory Care. I'm actually going to just explain really briefly what a geriatric psychiatrist is, because most people don't know, even when I tell them, you know. So I went to college, then I went to medical school for 4 years, and then I did 4 years of general psychiatry residency. And then I actually, usually you do a 1-year geriatric psychiatry fellowship. So you subspecialize in taking care of older adults with, mental health issues, memory issues, that kind of thing. I actually ended up doing a 2-year fellowship. It doesn't exist anymore. It was a HRSA fellowship with interdisciplinary geriatrics, with medicine, dentistry, and psychiatry. And it was designed, before we lost all the funding a few years ago, to train academic geriatrics, actually, because there's not a lot of us who work with older adults in any field, right? And so they brought all of us together, and we did a 2-year fellowship, including teaching and things from the Warner School of Education at the University of Rochester. And when I found out about elder abuse during my, I think it was my PGY 6, postgraduate year 6 fellowship, I ended up going and completing my master's in public health afterwards. I did a postdoctoral research fellowship. I actually, at one point, I was a promising researcher in elder abuse, working with Dr. Mark Lax in New York City. He was always trying to get me down to Cornell. to do all this stuff. But I actually do a lot of work in psychiatric emergency. I was actually the psychiatric emergency director at CPEP and mobile crisis. And I was the director of the residency, and now I'm the director of the Geriatric Psychiatry Fellowship. So education is super important to me, which is why whenever Kelly or Lindsay or anybody asks me to do these kind of things, I'm happy to oblige. So I have a very weird background in that way. That's why I want to mention it too, because if you meet other geriatric psychiatrists, which Dr. LaFaso and Sarah Duval probably know this, right? They don't usually have the same background as I have, you know, with emergency medicine and that kind of thing. Our geriatric psychiatry program actually is still, even though we don't have the funding, intertwined with our geriatric medicine program as well. We do all of the lectures together. And so the role I play on our E-MDT is I go to all of the meetings. I have been part of the upstate New York, you know, Finger Lakes. I know what we called it before. It was 7 counties, E-MDT. We were one of the original ones. And I kind of just fill that general role, understanding memory care, psychiatry, and, you know, some about medicine. And so I help with questions and things that we need to ask of people's primary care physicians and things like that. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Santos. Sarah, a little bit about yourself, your role on the team, and anything that you'd like E-MDT coordinators to know.
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I am a supervising attorney in our elder abuse prevention unit at the Center for Elder Law and Justice, CELJ for short. We are a nonprofit legal services organization. We're based in Buffalo, New York, but we have offices also in 2 smaller counties surrounding Buffalo. And I have been working in the legal aspect of elder abuse prevention for 8.5 years. Since I got out of law school, I've been right at CELJ. And from there, I sit on currently 5 teams where I provide civil legal advice to the team. You know, I love working on the E-MDTs. I think elder abuse, especially having a collaborative approach, is essential. And so I'm really, really excited to be here today and kind of share some of what I've learned. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here, and that's been my experience.
Welcome. All right, so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into our panel discussion. The first question that I have for you all is, what unique background or experience do you have that helps in your role in the MDT?
So I have a few things that I think have really added to my ability to work on the teams. Well, one is that I started my career as a nurse. In my nursing career, I was able to really see a broad swath of older adults, and I was particularly a nurse practitioner. And so I had a really good opportunity in that role to spend a lot of time with clients, which in medicine sometimes you don't. And so I really got to learn what the issues were for older adults and what their worries were and what their challenges were. And so that was a good start to my career in working with older adults. But then I went back to medical school and then started a house call program. Was one of the first things I did out of residency, and ran the house call program, home visit program for older adults for 13 years. And believe me, anybody who's done home visits knows what you see behind closed doors, especially in Manhattan. So that was a very big eye-opener for me in terms of certainly self-neglect, and then more sadly, intentional neglect and elder abuse, frank elder abuse. So, you know, in Manhattan, you've seen it all. I mean, you know, from apartments that are, horrifying to children trying to keep their parents' apartments and doing all kinds of nefarious things to hold on to those apartments, et cetera, et cetera. So, so that, and then I guess, you know, I've been a geriatrician now for 24 years. That helps. understanding and seeing a lot of things. And I was lucky enough about 4 or 5 years ago to have a sabbatical. And I did a pretty extensive research project with a colleague of mine on the forensics of elder abuse. So that's become a particular area of somewhat expertise, certainly of interest. And I think I bring that to the teams as well. So it's a combination of understanding aging, forensics, and I think my nursing background was a plus as well.
Absolutely. It sounds like you were able to bring in some of that experience from visiting older adults in their home to make the cases that you're hearing very real and kind of provide input.
Right. I really feel like when the APS workers tell me about an apartment that was hoarded, I get that. And I think in case if you haven't really seen one up front, you might not appreciate how bad they can get.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. LaFaso, I know your teams are very lucky to have you, so thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. It's my pleasure.
Dr. Santos, what background or experience will help you in your role on the team? I know you told us a little bit about that, but maybe you could elaborate.
So formal, Kelly.
I know.
Most people call me EJ, unless they're my patients. So. Well, I guess we're going to be formal today. So, as I explained to you, I have a lot of kind of varied interests for a psychiatrist, right? And as Dr. LaFaso mentioned, I actually also did a lot of home visits, which is not necessarily normal in training, but I make sure that my fellows do them. I think I kind of pushed for more training in that area than they were expecting. So I kind of pushed the envelope, because elder abuse wasn't something that and this is, oh my gosh, over 16 years now. We didn't talk about it, and we didn't talk about it in psychiatry. And I was frankly appalled that I didn't know more. I was like, oh my God, I've been a physician for like almost 6 years and I don't even know about this. No one's telling me, and when I started looking at it, most of the education was done in geriatric medicine, frankly, and still wasn't even that long ago, right? A lot of it was started in law. So when I looked at it in terms of psychiatry, I didn't see much at all. So then I started doing lectures on it for the University of Rochester School of Medicine, right? And that's how I became more involved in, learning about what can we do. And then, frankly, as Kelly knows, getting pissed off, that like we weren't doing more, what Absolutely. Is this? Like we just, we do all of this stuff, because I was doing lectures with child pediatricians and things about their abuse in children, and everyone's up in arms, and but no one would say anything about the older adults, like, oh, they're, we have APS. And I was like, APS is great, but it doesn't actually do a lot with elders. They can't, and I started learning about the laws and how their hands were tied and free will and all of these things. And I was like, well, we've got to do something about this. And so that's how I ended up getting training, ended up getting my master's in public health afterwards, after all of this training, and working with Lifespan very, very closely, going on house calls with our elder abuse prevention program, trying to see where the holes were, because a lot of times, it's either one way or the other. Someone's older and you assume that they don't have any kind of ability at all, right? Like there's so much ageism out there, right? And so then they take all their rights away, or they just assume, or people assume on the other hand, everything's fine, that they're adults and that they can make any of their own decisions, no matter how crazy they are, right? And there's, everything else is gray, right? I mean, that's what our work is. It's all in the gray. And so where do we come into that? So I started learning more about it. And actually, I have now created a geriatric forensics program in psychiatry. This is the first one. I have one fellow who is going to be working with us. Actually, we are in the midst of developing, she's graduating in July, developing a capacity clinic through my, that's the benefit of being the chief, right? The clinical chief. I can kind of develop these resources for people who can't afford it, because most of the time people, if they need capacity evaluations, what we're told is to go to a forensic psychiatrist. Forensic psychiatrists get paid a lot of money, right? I mean, it's very expensive to have an expert forensic psychiatrist, and most of them don't want to touch older adults. They do, like, if they're maybe some testamentary capacity, if there's like a dispute with an expensive will, they have to have some money involved, right? Or can they stand trial, right? Are they competent to stand trial? If somebody has a little bit of mild cognitive impairment, forget it. They don't know. They don't know what to look for. And so that's where I feel like my expertise lies, in that gray area, trying to find out, okay, I'd never assume that somebody, even if they have a diagnosis of dementia, doesn't have capacity to make decisions, right? Maybe no one ever asked them to make a healthcare proxy. Maybe nobody ever asked them to make a power of attorney. Just those little things. You can't afford $800 an hour for a forensic psychiatrist to do that evaluation. And that's where I think my expertise in trying to build this program works with our E-MDTs. And I think it's been really successful. It's been kind of hard this year. We're all remote, so we don't have a lot of experience. A lot of my patients can't hear. I'm yelling at them, or they don't have technology. There's a lot of different kind of barriers. But I think, that's the fact that we're having this conversation, and we're all thousands of miles apart, right? It's just fantastic. And that maybe, my goal with all of this is to get people excited about E-MDTs, and that we can all work together and figure out what resources we have in our areas. And that even if we don't necessarily have that resource in our area, we are the only geriatric psychiatry program in upstate New York, period. I'm actually from Buffalo. I didn't go back to Buffalo because Rochester has the program, and we are hoping to help all of the counties here. And that's just in New York State. With you guys coming on board, I can't wait to see what we can do across the country. So that's my spiel.
Fabulous.
Absolutely. And Dr. Santos, beyond those capacity assessments that you are able to provide for the older adults that we are reviewing on the E-MDT, one of my favorite things about being on an E-MDT that you participate on is your ability to very succinctly educate the team on that gray area. Capacity is not necessarily yes or no. There's a lot to talk about within there. And I think you explaining your journey of how you got there really shines when you're able to kind of explain to the team, let's look at this a little bit differently.
And I would say, thank you for saying that, Kelly. I do tend to run off and educate people a little bit because they never heard about these things, right? Most of the people who come to this work are coming from other disciplines, right? But one of the things that I think is different too is that I also am educating about the limits of our system, right? So when we have perpetrators, say, or alleged perpetrators, right? We always call them alleged perpetrators, that maybe is the grandson who is using drugs, and we want to do something. Like, what can we do about this, right? And I'm able to discuss, the limits of a mental hygiene transport, what you can make people do in terms of getting treatment for things. If we called the mobile crisis team, what would they legally be able to do? Because, most of the time we want to get the guns out there, right? We want to just take them and fix them. And those are things that can't happen. Not really. So, having realistic, I think, expectations, that's what our E-MDT has changed. I'll tell you what, because before we used to have these conversations in our consortium, our elder abuse consortium, right? What can we do about this? What can we do? And sometimes it would take 3 or 4 conversations about this until we all figure out, well, you know what? We really can't do as much as we had hoped, right? We all get up in arms. And so then what can we do? The E-MDTs really work. We always leave with action items for everybody. What can we actually do? What areas do we need to investigate that maybe we can actually get something done? And I feel like we are a lot more effective together that way than when we, with this mandate, than we used to be just having these conversations among ourselves.
Totally.
I love it. Thank you so much. Sarah. So what unique background or experience do you have that helps you in your role on the MDT? Your role differs from Dr. LaFaso's and Dr. Santos's in your profession quite a bit. So I'm interested to hear what you have to share.
Yeah, sure. So, on the teams, I provide kind of two roles. One is just general insight and kind of explaining the legal nuts and bolts to team members. The law is sometimes a little intimidating. There's lots of nooks and crannies with powers of attorney and guardianships and wills and trusts, and there's even bankruptcy issues. So my job is just kind of sit there a lot and examine when a new case is brought up, just provide some legal insight. I also do provide direct representation of clients when referred by a coordinator. So if a coordinator just determines, this individual, we really need some direct representation. There needs to be a power of attorney revoked, or maybe a new power of attorney, or there's questions about a guardianship, or this person needs a will. We're assigning it directly to you, Sarah, to provide representation. And that's, I think, where both of those, my experiences kind of help out with. You might be shocked, but when I graduated law school in 2012, I didn't know what elder abuse was or that it even existed. So the fact that they don't really go into that with lawyers, like, again, shocking.
It sounds like many of us are in the same boat.
Yeah. Yeah, so when I started at SLJ, I was lucky to go to an organization that primarily serves 60 plus. So I was already in an organization that had a lot of experience assisting older adults with legal needs. And I think that was really important in kind of framing how I just approach clients generally. There's capacity, and I know I'm coming at it from like this legal angle, right? But capacity is a huge thing for, I think, probably almost every single case that's brought up on an E-MDT. If you're looking, can this be prosecuted? Is there, capacity concerns, right? And I'm not a doctor, but oftentimes attorneys, whether or not you're on the team or like an outside attorney, you are asked to make an individual assessment that the individual you're helping has both the capacity to enter into and establish an attorney-client relationship and wants to do that, has the capacity to provide guidance. And so it's very interesting seeing that play out on the teams. And I often, if we do have medical insight, I will, look to that and work together and collaboratively, because as Dr. LaFaso and Dr. Santos can speak to way better than I am, capacity, there's a gray area. It can be, at least attorneys, it can be fluid. One phrase that I've heard people use is be on the island one day and off the island another. And similar to Dr. LaFaso and Dr. Santos, I have done client visits are a way of life at SLJ. We know that we cannot require our, downtown Buffalo. So we serve 9 counties. Though we have 3 offices, our clients are oftentimes not mobile. They don't want to come to downtown Buffalo and deal with the parking and try to get to our offices. So pre-COVID, I was on the road all the time, going both urban areas and rural areas, taking a paralegal or social worker oftentimes with me. We have social workers on staff, which is so incredibly helpful, going into homes and meeting with people individually. I also do it as part of the team. Often APS, Adult Protective Services, will have a case and they say, look, can you come with me on this visit? I think there may be a legal aspect here. And I'm like, sure, I'll meet you there. Let's go in together. So yeah, I know what clothes to wear on a client visit, and how to. There are times APS will say, "You want to bring your own folding chair to this one," and I'm like, "You got it." The trunk. And
I was just gonna say, Sarah, is it already in your trunk?
Yeah, it's already in my trunk.
Everybody who's had a mouse run over their legs, please raise your hand.
The mice, the cockroaches, oh my God, the crack vials.
Mm-hmm. You've got that cat that looks real sketchy, kind of rubbing up against you.
The smell.
Yeah, the smells. But it's important, it's important to go and see that and absorb that. And I do think that impacts, how I view these cases, because I've seen people living in actively abusive environments. And so I think that is unique to, many attorneys do client visits, but I don't think many attorneys have a focus on elder abuse prevention. I think bringing that to the team and understanding, the intersection between my direct obligations to a client, which I'll get into the ethics and confidentiality portion versus my obligation and my role on the team, and how kind of those interplay. I kind of went over briefly capacity questions. I often will have to meet with a client several times because you don't want to meet with somebody once, have them sign a bunch of documents, then you go back a week later and they don't remember who you are. I understand that older adults often present well, but it could be masking something else and they may not actually. I bring an ability to utilize databases like PACER. That's a federal database. It keeps all bankruptcies and federal cases on file. Anyone can access it, but being able to actually comb through and understand the documents is, I think, a unique skill, and you'd be surprised how much that can come up in a team. Utilizing public record searches, we have access to certain county databases, and reading a deed, right? Hey, there's a question, there's a life estate created, and when was it created and how was it used to power of attorney? Was this power of attorney valid? Guardianship questions, right? Should we petition for guardianship? That's a question that comes up often in our teams, right? We think this person might need a guardian. Sarah, what do you think? Should we petition? And I'm able, CELJ has a guardianship unit where we serve as guardian for over 100 individuals at a time. So bringing that specific experience with older adults, specific experience with legal issues that affect them. Also, one thing that I love about my experience is that CELJ really promotes trauma-informed care. So I've been trained in that and continually trained in it. So that I think is a little bit unique for some attorneys. And yeah, I just think too, attorneys, we have networks. So it's really important. I learned this from my social workers, but you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes you go to a team and they're asking you questions and I'm like, I don't know, I've never seen this kind of trust before, but I have a network of attorneys, both within our agency and just, relationships we've built in the community, where we've gone so far as to bring in pro bono attorneys to help out with issues facing E-MDT clients. For example, bankruptcy. I don't practice in bankruptcy court. We had a big bankruptcy issue. We recruited, I think, 7 pro bono attorneys to represent 35 plus victims when ongoing bankruptcy. So, yeah, that's just a little bit about my experience and how it kind of relates to my role on the team.
Absolutely. And Sarah, Center for Elder Law and Justice really is a treasure of an agency and a resource. A lot of communities don't have a civil legal agency that focuses on aging issues or helping older adults. Where would someone look if they, where would an E-MDT coordinator look if they didn't have a Center for Elder Law and Justice in their community?
Right. So I think one thing that, if you're looking for individuals or nonprofits with experience in with older adults, we hold the Title IIIB contracts in counties that are funded by the Older Americans Act. I believe that it's federal. So for example, and I'll break that down quickly, but I said we serve 9 counties. We're funded some by federal grants, some by state grants, and especially the smaller rural counties get a certain amount of money from the federal government that's set aside to pay for legal services for their residents, and they can contract out those funds. So we hold most of those Title III contracts in our area. So I think that if you had a question, you could reach out to your local Office for the Aging or Senior Services, however it is in your community, and just ask, do they have a legal service provider? Or you may be the coordinator of the team, right, that they've worked with. Sometimes there are private attorneys. I know that is the case in I'm sure many areas, but at least then you have a legal service provider. I think it's important. I do think that if you can find a provider with experience with older adults who can understand the complexities, that you can, there's a lot of great resources out there to educate. NCall is one. I use NCall all the time. I was on that. They taught me so much about when I was starting out, what is elder abuse and And you can educate an attorney on that. They can learn from team members. But I do think it's a special skill to have an attorney on board with experience dealing with older adults and just the capacity and the complexities that can come with serving that population.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. I can speak from experience as well. Seeing you participate on teams, there are amazing interventions that happen because of you and the role that you fill. So thank you so much for all you do. All right, so next question. We're going to start talking about confidentiality, ethics, conflicts of interest. I know this may look a little different for all three of you within your profession. So we'd love to hear from you what aspects of those, so confidentiality, ethics, conflicts of interest, and what professional guidance in your specific profession do you consider as you participate on the team? Dr. LaFaso, we'll start with you again.
All right. I guess, I mean, when Kylan used to run our groups, we would talk about ethical issues after each group, and it was just, they were unending, right? I mean, the whole field of elder abuse is just fraught with ethical dilemmas. But the two that I guess we see the most, at least from my point of view, is you have an older adult, they're in an unsafe situation. You have a son or a grandson or some ne'er-do-well move into their apartment, and before you know it, when all is said and done, it's the older adult that often has to leave the apartment. And if they have capacity issues, end up with guardianship, right? And, as we've evolved as the E-MDTs have evolved, we've really tried to really think about what are we doing in the E-MDTs because it just seemed like every case was ending up with guardianship. So that became a huge ethical issue for us. We know that, almost everybody wants to be home and not be whisked off to a nursing facility. They want to be independent. They want to live in the apartment that they lived in for 50 years. And here we are coming in and saying, well, your grandson's a little shady, and you're a little whifty, and we're going to, and I'm exaggerating, but I mean, often it ends up in guardianship. And that became a really big ethical issue for us. Are we really, in the end of the day, is the person happier in the nursing home or not? And of course we know they're safer. And so there's always this, this stress between what's safe and what we think the client really wants. So that's probably the biggest ethical issue our teams face, I would say. The other ethical issue for me is the physician on the team, because one of the big roles, and EJ, I'm sure you've alluded that you do this as well. One of the big roles for the physician on the team is to be a liaison between the team and the victim's primary care doctor or hospital or nursing home or whatever facility they're in. And so there's a lot of gray area about how much information can be exchanged in that dialogue. At Cornell, we checked with, we went through the legal process of figuring that out as much as one can. And we basically come to the place where we feel comfortable giving information to the primary care physicians or to institutions about our concerns, that is within the HIPAA guidelines of not extracting information from these places, but more giving information. But our legal also felt like we were covered by the Good Samaritan law. In terms of if we felt like we were in a situation where a client was really, really imminently about to be harmed, and we had information that could change that it would be okay for us to either elicit and or give information if we thought someone was really in a situation of imminent harm. So there's lots of gray here. We have no formal protocol here. We operate under case-by-case basis, but it does, it does cause some angst, as we go through these cases to sort of, figure out what the right thing to do. The other ethical situation is the grandson is psychotic and is either physically or verbally abusing an older adult. Are we allowed to speak with the grandson's physicians to see if the grandson is actually taking their medication or is on medication? Or what is our ethical responsibility about the person one off from the victim, and how much information can be exchanged in those situations? I'm sure, EJ, you face this all the time. So those are some of just a couple of the many ethical, I don't want to take everybody's time, but those are a couple of the situations that we face a lot. I forget if there was a part B to your question, but that was mostly it.
No, that was perfect, Dr. LaFaso. Thank you so much. And what comes across to me is just the weight in which you put on the ethical responsibility, and really thinking through and like leaning into these gray areas that are there, and just trying to figure out the best path forward by using your legal team at Cornell and all of that, just using the existing structure that you have to kind of get through and help as much as you can.
Yeah.
Dr. Santos, I saw you nodding, so it sounds like there are some similar themes.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Dr. LaFaso hit the nail right on the head. I mean, there is the autonomy versus beneficence, that whole ageism thing I was talking about, where you want to just run in there and grab them and keep them safe. But you can't just do that, right? People say that all the time. Well, why can't you just get guardianship, right? That used to be the answer, right? You're like, right. No, you can't just take away somebody's rights. And then people, when I do capacity evaluations, even long before, the E-MDT existed, oftentimes, if we lay aside, elder abuse as a thing, I will do capacity evaluations. I do a lot of work in the hospital as well. For like, say, a surgeon, and Kelly's heard this many times, a surgeon who the older adult is refusing to have surgery, right? For whatever reason, and they want you to say, oh, he doesn't have capacity, so I can just do the surgery. I can just cut off that toe. I can just do, and you're like, well, let's step back. There's a lot of things that have to happen before you can just go in there with your knife, right? But this is the best thing for them. What are the goals of care? Like, what was the plan for this person, right? Did he or she want this? Was it, he already had a below the knee amputation? He knew that this was from longstanding diabetes, or did he drop a hammer on his toe and now he's delirious and he doesn't know what he's saying? I mean, there's a lot of, it's all the gray area, right? And how do we think about that, so we're not just like Superman rushing in and doing what we think is best? Having that conversation that says, okay, everybody who does this work, right, wants to help, right? That's what we none of us went in there because we're getting paid well for this, or we're making a name for ourselves. That's not happening in this kind of work, right? But hopefully we're helping people. That's what we want to do. And so when we think, well, what's the most expedient way to help people? Right, I'm sure, like Dr. LaFaso and Sarah, I know Kelly does this, and our team is like, hold on a second. Let's step back and see what's the big picture, right? And I think it's a little different for us, in upstate than down in the city, because in the city, you guys have lots of people, but also lots of different resources. You have lots of different hospitals, lots of different universities. We're alone here. The University of Rochester is alone in this. We started out with 7 counties. Just in my own clinic, we serve 31 to 35 counties, period. Yet we have no choice. People drive from all over the state, even if they're closer to New York City, because they don't want to drive in the city. And I don't drive in the city either. I mean, I'll take the train down, I'll fly down, I'll take an Uber. But, upstate, and I grew up in Buffalo, I'm used to upstate. I'm wed here, and we all work together. So we have a memorandum of understanding that we worked on right from the beginning. Luckily, I was always part of this team when I was much younger, right? And we helped develop all of these, processes. We worked together to learn, like, what are the big holes. We had to talk to our legal teams on both sides, like you were saying, Dr. LaFaso. They know what I'm doing. Luckily, we have that memorandum of understanding. And even now in the outlying hospitals, since things have changed over the years with different kinds of insurance and, the Affordable Care Act places, and a lot of our hospitals and outliers are either aligned with there's only two systems, right? For us, it's the university or the Rochester regional system. And I am the head of geriatric psychiatry. I have worked in most of the places. They just know me. There's not that many other people. There's only 2,000 geriatric psychiatrists in the country. So, and if you notice, I have kind of a big mouth. So people know who I am. I'm not going to sit idly by, and be a wallflower and not speak up if something is wrong. So I have, at least for myself, this is why I can work doing this, I think, because they know who I am. They know what I mean, and I'm not pulling any punches. So I have the ability to talk to most, and I train most of the people. I mean, if they were in medical school or in the EMTs or even the judges and the police, I probably trained them at some point, and I will use that to my advantage, to call somebody and say, hey, get your butt out of your ass and see what's in front of you, because we will try to get releases of information. There are places that you definitely need to have it, and most people will sign that. Actually, they're like, look, we're doing this for you. Can I talk to your doctor? I'm like, sure. Why not? And I will make recommendations about, medications that, might be affecting their cognitive function, right? I'm sure Dr. LaFaso does this too. When you're seeing people on oxybutynin and they're taking Benadryl to help them sleep and they're doing all of these things and you're like, what? Oh, so I'm also, since all of this happened, most recently in the last couple of years, I became the medical director of the memory care program at the university. So I also help run the Finger Lakes Center of Excellence for Alzheimer's disease. Another reason that I have some clout. So if, and this is different, if I think somebody they really should be worked up, maybe they have an underlying dementia or something's going on, or they have a longstanding depression no one's been treating, she's been like this for 30 years. I can either bring her to my outpatient clinic or, in psychiatry, or also the memory care program. And that's something that's definitely unique. I know you can't just do this other places, but that's what the building of relationships is, with the E-MDTs and finding those resources and finding somebody who feels as passionately about you do, that we need to do the right thing, even if, and this is the hard part, it's not the right thing that you thought it was going to be. So I have seen people, and Kelly knows this, we'll bring them to my memory care program because maybe the PCP has been trying to get them into the program for years, trying to get them to go. And we've got now Adult Protective Services willing to bring them. So I'll see them. And even if, I have to say, you know what? He actually can make his decisions about that. I'm so sorry. But I think we can help them in X, Y, and Z way. But I don't think you need to go for capacity. I think we need to work through this. I think we need to have conversations about goals of care, end of life. I do have those conversations. And thank God for my geriatric medicine training too, because that's how I got that. By the way, a lot of people don't have that. I did do training with palliative care and that kind of thing. And so I train my staff. We all have those conversations. Make sure there's the healthcare proxy somebody trusts. Make sure, you at least start having the conversations about power of attorney and what the older adult wants to have happen. Because when it's a crisis, it's too late, right? And so I think it's important to have those conversations. And that's where I think those ethical issues come out, right? What is the reason that somebody is choosing X, Y, or Z? Is it just convenience because he or she is there? Are they really thinking through this? Is there coercive pressure from somebody to say that, well, the eldest son must be the one? Who knows? But those are the kind of things that it really takes a while to piece through. And you have to have a much bigger understanding of the systems of care that I don't think many people get outside of geriatrics. I gotta say, geriatric medicine and geriatric psychiatry look at problems in a much more interdisciplinary, holistic way. That if you're looking for people like that in your E-MDTs, you've got to find people who have that kind of mindset.
Incredible. Thank you so much. So, maybe we're not going to find someone who is, super well connected in all aspects, but someone who has that mindset and who, has that experience and can kind of think through some of those ethical issues that come up for clients. And EJ, your point is so well taken with me. I have been at that table when that happens. You know, being able to kind of switch gears and be human and say, you know, we kind of wanted a quick, wonderful outcome for this person, but that's not the road we're headed down anymore. We need to kind of switch gears and think about what else we can offer them now that we have more information about their decisional capacity.
Oh, I will say, because I forgot to mention, Dr. LaFaso mentioned, like, you know, the 1 degree of separation, like that grandson who is using. I will, like, I don't usually go to that person's physician directly, but I will use mobile crisis team. I will give someone a heads up and say, maybe you should check on this, you know, in a different way, you know, if it happens to be, which it does sometimes, where it's the same physician, actually, you know, it's a family physician, right? There's the only one family physician in that area, and that office sees everybody. They probably know already, and you just kind of give them the heads up, like, have you seen Brad in a while? Like, what's going on there? And you just leave it, and people run with it, you know. So.
So it sounds like you have
gray areas.
Dr. LaFaso and Dr. Santos, you may have lots of premonitions or just feelings about things from time to time. Oh, thank you so much. So Sarah, lots of confidentiality, ethics, and conflict of interest things in the civil legal profession. What do you have to share for us?
Yeah, that's kind of, you know, it's sometimes the most frustrating part of my job, but it can be also like a great thing, you know. So confidentiality, attorney-client confidentiality, a lot of my clients, when I first meet them, it's surprising and how little people have with, especially I think a lot of my clients are lower income, so they've never really had an attorney. Right? They've never had somebody directly representing them, advocating on their behalf, right? And so their understanding is a little sometimes limited, and not just clients, but frankly, I think I think the public's interaction with direct, you know, representation attorneys is fairly limited. So I think people have a lot of, but there's to contrast that, the entertainment world, with all the Law and Orders and all the, you know, the shows, right? Everyone thinks, oh, they base a lot of the information on that. So it's really important to me when I'm on a team is to be very, very upfront about what my confidentiality obligations are, and so that the coordinator and the team understand. And part of that, you know, includes, you know, conflicts of interest. But for confidentiality, I encourage, you know, when you're seeking an attorney or a civil legal partner, that in New York, so the American Bar Association has confidentiality guidelines, but every state, I believe, I know in New York, has the rules of professional conduct. So attorneys are licensed and you are allowed to practice because of, you know, you have to be admitted to the profession, right? And if you violate certain rules, your license can be pulled, similar, I know, to medical professions, really almost any professionally, right? And one of those is if you breach confidentiality. So when in context of a team, as I said before, I have kind of 2 roles, right? One is to provide a civil legal perspective to the team. And the second is, if assigned by the coordinator, to provide direct representation. And that's where the confidentiality comes in. If I'm just providing general guidance, you know, I'm not bound by the same attorney. I'm not bound by attorney-client. I don't have a client. So if there's a sticky case and they're like, hey, Sarah, what do you think? Can you read these papers? Can you read this POA? Can you read this guardianship petition? Can you look at this? All day. All day, I'll give you my unfiltered opinion. You know, I'll take it back for research, right? But the second the coordinator says, all right, Sarah, I would like this individual wants your direct representation. I'd like you to directly represent them. Here's a case file. We open a separate case file in our legal server, which is how we track everything. And that's kind of where the confidentiality and the ethics rules apply to us. In New York, there are, and this is kind of the guideline I use to allow myself to continue to participate on the team, is that a lawyer should not knowingly reveal confidential information unless, I skipped a little bit, unless. One of the exceptions is the disclosure is impliedly authorized to advance the best interests of the client and is either reasonable under the circumstances or customary in the professional community. Now, all of our E-MDTs, everyone signs confidentiality agreements. When I'm working with a client that I refer to the E-MDT, they come to us first. I actually have them sign a form authorizing me to refer their case to the E-MDT. Understanding that the aspects of that, I will have to discuss aspects of their case with team members. So they have written understanding that, you know, we have the same goals here. You know, we want this alleged perpetrator prosecuted, or we want, you know, we have the same goals here, and this team's going to help us further advance those goals. But there have been times, and I have, you know, a specific example of this where it can get pretty sticky confidentiality wise. The example I have is our office received a referral from the son of an alleged victim. We never actually spoke with the alleged victim. We get third-party calls all the time. It's very rare that an alleged victim of elder abuse calls and says, "Hi, I'm being abused. Can you be my lawyer?" It's often, you know, a third party or a community partner, right, seeking help. In this case, this son was accusing another relative of taking about, I think it was about 70 grand from his mother. And he had also reported it to the police. He had also reported it to law enforcement. So it was through law enforcement that it ends up as an E-MDT team case. And so I was through the E-MDT consulted. Now the son did call our office. We never established attorney-client with the potential client. We just said, okay, it's going to be a team issue. We'll work on it that way. Well, it turns out that this individual, that these funds were actually, this individual was actually on benefits. And the funds that were allegedly taken were actually funds that had been allegedly kind of squirreled away and would have made that person over-resourced. So they were actually in a bind where they were actually potentially criminal themselves, right? And the police discovered this in interviewing various family members. Now, had I been assigned direct representation of this individual and spoken with them and revealed this information, I would have had to completely recuse myself from every activity, because that is not in her best interest to have that information come to light. And I may have actually had to move forward in trying to defend that. Now, it didn't happen that way because there was no direct representation. So when you're thinking about attorneys, you know, I think having that conversation about, you know, tell me up front, what are your ethical obligations, right? What happens in confidentiality? Because the last thing you want too is an attorney on the team who's like, I just can't say, it's all confidential. You know, I mean, there are in certain areas, there are specifically in the rules exceptions to those rules. Because if you're furthering a client goal, then that's okay, and it's implied. And again, we also have the form we have our clients sign. But I think understanding that there may be times at a meeting where someone's revealed something to me and I just can't reveal it because it's not, I can't, I would lose my license. So in those situations, I have to say, you know, I really, unfortunately, can't discuss this. And I also have had times when it goes to conflicts of interest. Another thing is, and I think this goes especially for our smaller areas, smaller towns, there's less people, you get a lot more conflicts of interest, right? So that's not just for attorneys, it's for everyone on the team, but you know, for attorneys, there have been cases where a name is mentioned. I have to look it up in our legal server database, and if we represent it or if they're an adverse party, I have to say, I have to recuse myself for this portion of the meeting, go stand outside while it's discussed, and then I can come back in. It doesn't happen often, but it has happened, and you just don't want to be an attorney in the position where you have privileged information And you don't want to be in that position, privilege information, because that's a license jeopardizer, not ender.
Yeah.
So, there's another really brief example of one though, where a client did disclose something to me in confidence, but we were able to, I read the ethical rule and was able to kind of move forward and share with the team with the client's permission, because I think you all know, I don't know if everyone does know, clients can't give the attorney permission to violate confidentiality, right? The client can't say, I want you to tell people this. Only attorneys still have that confidentiality. But there are certain ways that if you think creatively, you can still help better the client's situation. We had a client, we were very concerned in one of the counties who was there was concern about him being scammed. He had a decent income, and yet he owed a bunch of money on credit cards. It was all going out the window, and there was some concern. I met with him, and I always explained to clients, this is confidential. I was assigned direct representation. What you say to me stays in this room. And in our conversation, it came out that he had been victimized in a long, ongoing scam and had lost so much money he couldn't even pay his own heat. And that scam had recently ended. Or so we thought. But there's also people on the call, scammers, doesn't take much to switch your identity and then once you're a victim, you're likely to be a victim. So him disclosing this was essential to the team's understanding of where this gentleman was and what was going on. So I actually, got his permission, and I think we actually brought in another member from Lifespan, and he was able to kind of share with her what he had told me, and we were able to then have a separate sit down, because the information he told her isn't privileged in the same way, and we were able to kind of best work as a team to help protect him from future victimization by the scammer. So yeah, that's to talk to your attorneys about their ethical obligations and confidentiality, understanding conflicts of interest, and just really knowing that should be important. Again, I'll go back to it briefly. Also, just capacity is always something that we have to keep in mind too. You need a client. And there are times when I'm asked to go on a visit and I just have to say, I don't think this individual has the capacity to enter into a attorney-client relationship. It's time to bring out, the Geri Psych or try to get some primary care records, because at this point, I don't have confidence. It could be an underlying medical issue that if addressed, they may recover, and I can. But at this point, I really can't. And ethically, I can't do this. So.
For sure, Sarah. I've seen you hold both your ethical professional responsibility in the forefront and also express your understanding of the important work of the team and trying to, find a way to hold both of those things at the same time. And it's really incredible. I know all three of you do that. It's an ongoing conversation, and you all trust your E-MDT coordinators to assist you in that and have that conversation ongoing. And that's really where I feel like we're able to balance some of this and be successful. So thank you again. One last question for the three of you. We did have another section planned, but I'm just going to go ahead and skip over that in the interest of time. After this question, we'll probably just go right into the Q&A. But my last question for you is, do you have anything to share about how an E-MDT coordinator, might make the best use of your time? So if you had to give one little snippet of, what's the best use of your time, what would you say?
I would say as much as possible to have a clear question for us and to have as reliable information as is possible, understanding that it's sometimes fluid. If they want us to contact people, this is very concrete, but comes up a lot. If they want us to contact people to have the correct names and phone numbers, and because I spend a lot of my time Googling institutions and physicians' names because they're not always accurate. I know that's a very small thing, but it does actually take a lot of time.
Such a big thing. We want to make sure you have what you need to do what we're asking you. So that's awesome. Thank you. Sorry,
and
go
also
on.
No, that's just the last thing is, at least in New York, it's very helpful at the time of the meeting to have the psych evaluations physically there for us to review rather than hearing it secondhand, which of course can be a very different interpretation than when we actually read the reports. So that's usually the case in our E-MDTs, but sometimes they're not there, and we get reports that we're not always sure are exactly clinically correct. So I mean, those are just a couple of little things that help us.
That's awesome, Dr. LaFaso. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say also to have pictures for me, if there are pictures of bruising patterns, those are always very helpful for me.
Awesome. For your team meetings, those pictures, when they're available, are they shared just directly with you as the physician because you have training? Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Yeah, some things that I don't think I would have thought of on day one working with an E-MDT, information ahead of time as much as possible is super helpful, and thinking through what you need in order to do some of those recommendations with your team. So I'm sure that'll be really helpful for the folks on the call today. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly, Kelly. So that I would echo that it's nice when I actually can get the name ahead of time and I'm able to look through the records. I mean, again, it's a lot easier in upstate New York for me to find more records than it is for Dr. LaFaso because our records are actually more aligned. We actually all use Epic in both hospital systems, and we have this thing called Care Everywhere. So most people in the area have some kind of something in there, like even at least a name and the name of their doctor, because sometimes people don't even know that, right? I mean, if you find them and they're very, very confused, they might not even know the last time they saw a doctor or who it was. And I can look back and say, well, the last appointment in here, it says it was like 5 years ago, and this was the name of the person that we got, right? So you can kind of find out more information, and it's a lot easier to look that up ahead of time, or at least be familiar with some of that and look through the records if we can. And yeah, those are mostly just shared with me as well ahead of time. But I can bring a lot more. I can help the coordinator, I think, be more prepared with some questions too, and things that they can ask of the other team members to think about rather than just on the fly kind of doing that. That works too. I do try to attend every meeting, because even if they don't think that there's necessarily a medical or psychiatric issue, a lot of times there's questions that I have about maybe the chemotherapy somebody had years ago that nobody thought about because it happened a long time ago, or it's not something that's current. There's a lot of questions that I have, I think, that no one else would think of because of the weird way I think about things. So that's it.
Oh, we definitely need your weird way of thinking about things, Dr. Santos. It's absolutely necessary to the functioning of the team. So, Sarah, any final words on one thing that you'd want the E-MDT coordinators to know?
I would echo what Dr. Santos just said. In terms of presence at the meetings, I think especially when you're starting a team, and I know you're going to have a contract for civil legal services, and it's how best we want to spend this contract. Do we want to just refer direct cases and say, hey, we think this person needs a power of attorney, we're going to call it out? But I would encourage teams to have the civil legal services attorney actually attend every meeting if they can. One, if you determine that's just not fiscally feasible, or if the rate is different, I also have a paralegal that is able to attend meetings, and sometimes you can even get a lower rate. But having someone from the civil legal services world sit on the meetings from the beginning, I think is important, not just for your team's perspective, because I think it can save a lot of work later on if I'm able to look at a power of attorney at that meeting and say, yeah, it's not valid, it wasn't executed properly, right? It saves a lot of runaround down the line. But I also think it's important for the attorneys to get in the mindset of collaboration. I'm lucky in that CELJ and we're a very, very collaborative environment. I was on a lot of councils and task forces before the official E-MDTs started. So it's just a natural way of doing things for me. But it's not always the way with attorneys. Attorneys sometimes live in sometimes their own little bubble, you know, and getting that relationship with other team members like senior services, again, protective services for adults. I can't tell you how valuable it is as an attorney to pick up the phone and be able to call someone I know at APS and say, hey, I just got this referral. Can you give me your background? We do that on every single case we're referred, E-MDT or not. I mean, we have a ton of cases. It's in our intake. Unless the client specifically says, do not call them, we call. And as long as we get the client's permission, or even before we talk, there's a third party referral. So that it just, but I really don't think you get that unless you're sitting at those meetings. And to me, I just gained a whole new level of respect for the professionals that and everything they bring to the table. I don't think you can replace that by just taking the occasional case when it's determined that legal services might be needed.
Great.
That's wonderful, Sarah. That's also my experience. There's a great benefit to having you all sit at the table with us. So I see Alicia has let us know that everyone is off of mute, or everyone is able to unmute themselves, and we can start the question and answer session. One thing that I just want to mention before we go into that is that I know everyone on the line, your projects may be just a little bit different, what you have, funded, what you have as far as a specialty service, but hopefully today gave you a little bit of idea of important members on your team and how these three different professions could potentially be of great benefit to you when we think about enhancing our multidisciplinary team. So I will open the floor to questions. Alicia, did we have any come in the chat while we were talking?
I did not see any come into the chat, but everyone is unmuted, and please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask the questions aloud as well.
Since no one's saying anything, let me just say, I want to echo what Sarah said about the team dynamic. You know, it really is important, especially when you're getting started, you know, and there's new people that come in and out of different jobs too, to have everybody trust each other, because you do sign that confidentiality agreement, but you know, you have to know that someone is coming from that same place, you know, you are of wanting to help, because we all have our own experiences with attorneys or, you know, police officers or the DA or whoever's at the table with you, right? You know, and it's nice to be able to, you know, and hopefully someday we can all actually look each other in the eye again, you know, and sit around the actual table, because that is missing, I will say, in this time. We do have our calls, you know, virtually like this, right? But it's hard.
I agree, Jay. And we start every meeting with a couple of sentences about how it's a safe place, how there are no stupid questions, how if the presenter doesn't have information, it's okay. We're here to figure out what information needs to be gathered. You know, and it's it's been a very, very nice journey that way, seeing the team gel. And it does take time. I will tell anyone who's starting a new E-MDT, but the respect, and, you know, there are no stars of the show. Everybody has to understand that it's a group process. And that has worked really well because of leadership from people like Kylan Johnson and Dina Schwartz, and other people have done a beautiful job of that. But it's it's an important job to be the leader of those groups, and it's not easy.
Absolutely. So I did have a question come in here to the chat, and I know, Sarah, I kind of had you answer this a little bit earlier, but the question is, how would someone go about finding their own geropsychiatrist, civil legal attorney, or geriatrician? So Dr. LaFaso, if you're able to answer that question, I'll have you go first.
If you don't mind, because then I will, and I have to apologize, I will have to scoot out in a minute or so. But so what I would think the easiest way to find somebody would be to go to your local academic institution and see if they have a geriatrics division. And what I would suggest you do is to talk to division chiefs and ask for their young faculty who might want to define their careers in a new way. It's appealing to clinicians to work on these teams because it's something different. It breaks up their clinical week of having to crank out patients every 15 minutes. It's a fascinating, obviously, I don't have to convince this group how meaningful the work is. I would also consider, if you cannot find a geriatrician or a geriatric psychiatrist, both of which are rare, to consider geriatric nurse practitioners. There are geriatric nurse psychiatry specialists who I think could certainly do this work very well if you were unable to find a physician to fill the role. Yeah, I mean, I think those are really the areas that you would go to try to find people. Certainly family practitioner programs as well. I think family practitioners would have the right mindset to want to be part of something like this, because like geriatricians, they do look more holistically at people. So I think, you know, you'd have to go to academic medical centers and look for geriatrics practices and do it that way. I don't know, EJ, do you have
I would have said that
thoughts?
too for academics, but there's a lot of people who, you know, especially in more rural areas, if there's no big institution, I would actually, for a geriatric psychiatrist, I might actually contact the American Association for Geriatric Psychiatry, that's AAGP. I am actually the secretary treasurer, for full disclosure right now, but I actually do get a lot of people asking questions because we are a small group. And so you will just send an email to people like, do you know somebody in such and such an area? You know, because a lot of people in practice actually do like independent work. You know, they do nursing home contracts, they do like, and so they may be flexible with their time. They might be, you're right, Dr. LaFaso. I mean, it does break up like seeing patient after patient after patient. And if your heart's in it and you've seen it out there in the world that, you know, what you want to know what I can do, this is a good way. Most people who are practicing physicians don't have time to go look for this stuff, you know, so if you contact them, they might be happy about it, you know.
Awesome. And a really big thanks to Dr. LaFaso for joining us today. I know you said you have to jump off the call, and everything you shared is so valuable and so wonderful. And thank you for all of your work and your clear passion for this field.
Thanks. Great to be with you all. Nice to meet you, EJ. Nice to meet you, Sarah, and everybody. Be well.
Thank you. And I do see in the chat that Nancy Aiken from Baltimore said, we found a geriatric psychiatrist at a long-term care facility who also has a private practice, and he is awesome. So just kind of mentioning that she was able to find someone in that way. And Rebecca Beaumont says no questions, but thanks for a great presentation. Let's see. Okay, and we're right about at 2:15. I know, Sarah, you talked a little bit about that funding that should be available nationally. If folks have any other questions about how they might get in contact with a civil legal attorney, I will please send them into the center, folks, and we'll be sure to connect and get you answers to those. So I think we're at about our time, and I'll let everybody go for today. But Sarah and EJ, same as Dr. LaFaso, thank you for all of the amazing information you shared. I know this stuff can be gold for E-MDT coordinators out there trying to get people to the table and trying to do the work. So you have been so helpful today. And thank you to all of our grantees for the time that they spent here with us. I hope you got something valuable out of this. Again, if there are more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Technical assistance is available and we can kind of dig into some of this with you.
And Kelly, I will, you know, it might be bad, but I will put out there, if you do find somebody that isn't used to this work, like if you find a geriatric psychiatrist or a geriatrician who wants to talk about it, I'm happy to help, because, you know, there's only very few of us who do this. And it's nice to have someone to bounce ideas off of and things like that. And I feel like I've been doing this a long time, but hopefully I don't look like it.
You do not.
But Kelly and Lindsay have my information if you need anything. So.
That's such a generous offer, EJ. Thank you so much. I'm sure anyone would be really lucky to talk with you. And if folks do get someone that is interested in this, yeah, let's make a connection. That would be great. All right. Sarah, any last thoughts before we sign off?
No, I'm in the same, I know if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. The you know, laws are slightly different, or practice, you know, you have to be barred in a certain state. So New York, I'm very familiar with. Other states I might not be, but there's general ideas on practicing and participating in E-MDT as a lawyer, legal services provider. I'm happy to share whatever knowledge I have, because I really believe in these as the best way to handle cases of elder abuse and exploitation. It's very client-centered, and I'm just really, really glad to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope everyone has a really, really great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. On that very poignant note, I will say goodbye. Bye, everyone. Thanks again.